All right. We are live. How's everybody doing out there in Fish Twitter, Fish Facebook, Fish YouTube land? My name is Brian Brinkman. I'm really excited to be back here. It feels like it's been forever, but it's only been a couple of weeks since I've been hanging out talking about fish here via the live airwaves to you all. Kind of figured we're about halfway between summer tour and fall tour starting. And so I wanted to have a few conversations with some of my favorite people to talk fish with about kind of the state of where fish is at right now. What did we just witness on the summer 2021 tour? And, just kind of do a sprawling deep dive. And there's nobody better to kick that off with than my good friend, Drew Hitz, who I will be bringing onto the show here shortly. If you all recall, we talked after the first night of Hershey together and had a really great, really interesting conversation. I kind of wanted to pick up a few of the threads that we discussed at that point in time, as well as kind of just dive deep into our thoughts on Fish Summer Tour. So we're just going to kind of go without a net here and just kind of get into a larger conversation about where Fish is at right now and kind of our thoughts on the larger tour. Before I do that, though, I do want to remind you all that we are presented here at HFPod on tour by Shift Genuine Cannabis. Please visit shiftcannabis.com for all your cannabis needs here in the lovely state of Colorado. We just wrapped up a fantastic contest with Shift to send 2 people to Las Vegas. And who knows? Maybe there's another contest on the horizon. I just speak into the microphone here, but maybe at some point here soon there'll be something new to bring you. The other thing I wanted to shout out is our media partner at Jambase. Fantastic people work over there who are bringing you news, reviews, tons of information about the larger jam band world. So head over to Jambase. We're so grateful for their support and for their love. And then finally, I would love for this to be interactive as much as possible. So I'm going to bring Drew on here in a second, but please throw questions, throw comments into the chat boxes wherever you're watching this via Twitter, via YouTube, via Facebook. We'll respond to some of your questions throughout the larger show here, but would love to hear kind of your thoughts as we get into larger discussions around Fish 2021. And with that, I'm going to bring my buddy Drew on. Drew.
I'm paying attention. I heard every word you just said.
Drew, what was the answer to the last question? No. How are you doing, my man?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's kind of a beautiful, crisp fall day here in Denver, Colorado. We are kind of that halfway point between summer and fall tour. So I'm doing some re-listening while also using this as an opportunity to kind of catch my breath and check in on music that was released in August and early September that I may have missed. So everything's good over on my end. How about you?
Yeah, it's a rainy day here, which had a little bit more, drama than usual getting the kid to school. So everybody was driving their kid to school because it was raining, and an overachieving parking traffic cop got into it with me. So which was fun. But then he actually ended up apologizing to me because I'm white. So it all ended up working out just fine.
That's the state of the world. So my son just started kindergarten about a month ago, and the drop off process, I had forgotten this because the last time I did it, I was a kid and my parents were dropping me off at school. There's like so much internal politicking that goes with like where your parking spot is, where you can bring your kid. There's always the group of parents that break the rules. And, so you're sitting there like 15 feet away from your kid, watching them go in. You want to give them another hug. And like, there's the Riley parent that runs up to give their kid another hug. I don't know. It's just COVID and parents with kids going to school for the first time in 2 years. It doesn't mix very well. It's an interesting experience.
Yes, it is.
Well, we are not here to do parent corner for the next hour to 2. As much as I would love to hear about your experiences as a grateful dad, as you will say.
Yes.
I wanted to bring you on to talk through Fish Summer 2021 and kind of get into kind of the nitty gritty of where we're at this point in time. In terms of how Fish is playing right now, what kind of the historical contexts are for what they're playing. Um, I did want to ask you though, first and foremost, I gave you a quick homework assignment before this that you may or may not have received. Can you compare Fish 2021 to Mozart at age 12 and kind of where the two combine, compare and contrast?
I am I am not a big fan of early Mozart. I will tell you that. So yeah, I'm Mozart's great, of course, but I don't. The only piece that I really put on voluntarily, just because I. So here's the thing: if I never encountered Mozart, I would probably seek it out. But Mozart is everywhere, so you don't really have to seek it out. And when I was 15 and a student at Tanglewood, they that was 1991, and that was some real round number anniversary of his birth or death, or of him doing something awesome. They celebrate something every year with Mozart.
Sure.
But they played every single piano concerto, like all 40 of them at Tanglewood in that summer, and I fell asleep during every single one of them. So Mozart Requiem, when he was like in the process of dying, and he like wrote it for like himself. That's some badass stuff right there. But Mozart at age 12, not my jam.
This is the first shocking comment that we're going to hear from you over the next couple hours. I appreciate you taking the bait, though. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, though, kind of a generally speaking, I think this will let us get into a larger conversation. What do you think about the state of Fish in 2021? What are your thoughts on this last tour and kind of where we're at right now?
My first thought is that it's warm in here, so I'm turning down my thermostat, which I can do from my phone, which is wild still to me.
That is the state of the world in 2021. There we go.
That it is. So Fish, I was really, really impressed with how cohesive they came out of the gates creatively. There's a lot of famous tours, even from back in what I would argue in a lot of ways was their like the real zenith for them creatively, that didn't start all that well. Fall '95, there's 4 shows at the end of September in California, and if you're listening to this, you probably haven't heard any of them, and that's for a reason, because there's like some nice stuff, but it's like there's no reason that you would be like to your friend, be like, hey, you should totally check out 928.95. Like, you have to listen to this. Like, has said no one ever. It was someone who's listening. It's their first show, and now they're mad at me, and that's fine.
There's nothing to resemble Summer '95. Like, it's like 4 shows in complete isolation in a sense.
Yep, but this tour, I was very impressed, especially in 3.0, 4.0. It just kind of takes a little while for them to get going. Like, it's, how do you explain it? Especially when you're talking about improvisation, when Fish is at their best, like the Deer Creek Simple, or the Carini from Atlantic City, or like the Catapult Madness, at Dick's. They're like finishing each other's sentences. There's when the Carini, I think it's the second modulation, or maybe there's only one. There's a modulation in Carini, which goes up a fifth, if I remember correctly, that it's like I rewound it, because it's just like it sounds like it's something that they rehearsed over and over and over again. It's like it's that smoothly and that quickly done. That's not happening in the opening show of any tour, like not to that extent. And it's not binary. They're not either bad at the communicating or good at the communicating. And they're great at it, but on a Fish scale of 1 to 10, with 5 being, the old shout out to Scott Jordan, who back in the rec.music.fish days, he had something called the Scott Jordan Concert Review Poll, the SJCRP. Have you ever heard of this?
I've heard of this. Yeah, this is great.
So yeah, where an average Fish show is a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And Charlie Dirksen would always say is average great, because in general, you ask people how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how was the show? And everybody says like 8, 9, or 10. If it wasn't that good, they say 7. And that's actually like a scale of 1 to 4, right? Where it's like 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
And so Phish in general, in terms of like the communication and creative communication within jams, their tours frequently start at like a 2 on that scale, which is still elite compared to the rest of the world, and Lord knows compared to the rest of the jam band world. But then like by the end of and this one, it just kind of felt like relative to the start of other tours that the jamming that happened even just by like Alpharetta, like which was just like third and fourth shows of the tour. That's not dissing the first 2 because there was some really nice stuff in there as well. But like it felt like they got up to 5, 6, 7 territory way faster than they usually do, which was very which was surprising for a couple of reasons. First, because it's faster than it usually was, but second of all, because they just had this like huge long hiatus, and like they also. I mean, this was the most traumatic thing that you have lived through. I have lived through, like in terms of societally, right? The band has lived through. So it's like they were right there with us, being scared of the air for long stretches of time. And so, it was very cool to see how quickly they came out of the gates in terms of like cohesive, creative, not just playing well near each other, but really, interacting on a level that was each of them were organically changing the course of where things were going.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, I think I did a big re-listen to, I kind of make a playlist of standout performances from each show. And it could be a jam, or it could be like kind of the guiding post I always put forward is there's a version of Show of Life of All Songs from Albany 2018 that is not jammed, but it's stretched to a point that like there's a ton of intentionality within it. So I'll throw those type of performances into this larger playlist that I make throughout the year. And I went back and I was listening through the 2021 version, and I was blown away by how in the Arkansas show, which had its challenges, if we put it nicely, there were moments in Simple, and there were moments in Runaway Jim when Runaway Jim was kind of fading out, where you heard hints at what was to come with Phish 2021, and then 2 nights later, and in Alabama, and then the Alpharetta shows, you hear it in both Carini, the Chalk Dust Torture from Alpharetta, and then obviously the Tweezer from the final night at Alpharetta. This band that was able to kind of take it up a notch in a sense, and play in this communicative style that it felt a part, and I want to ask you about this, but like it felt to me a part of what we had been hearing since the Baker's Dozen, but it also felt like this totally new style of communication from Phish that was much quicker to react, that was much quicker to understand kind of the modulations and the kind of demented riffs that each person was throwing out. Trey's rig obviously had a big part to this, but as a result of that, I remember thinking that first weekend, are we in a really good Phish tour? And that's something that has happened, I feel like, rarely through the 3.0 era, where, you mentioned it, most tours start at like a 2. This, I felt like, started somewhere around a 1 or a 2 with the Arkansas. It was just great to have them back. But then 4 shows in, you're like, wait, where exactly are we at this point? And you're starting to think context before 2009. And that to me really stuck out as not only, an inspiring aspect of them coming back, but also the fact that they were able to maintain that through the tour. I'm curious, from your perspective, is that just practice, do you think? Is that motivation after this extreme experience that we all went through for the previous 18 months? Is that gear that has come into play? I mean, where do you see that kind of impacting the band, where they're able to start at such a high but then keep that consistently?
So this is just a guess. This is I'm
Yeah.
pulling this out of my ass because I don't actually know.
We
But
won't reveal your sources. It's okay.
my my let me see if I can get the wording that they wanted me to use. No, I'm just kidding. No, I have a feeling that after I can tell you the first gig that I played, which was actually last December, so it was still very much in the middle of everything.
Mhm.
And it was just like a 1 hour quintet gig. It was actually at the Watergate Hotel here in DC. It was in the courtyard, which is huge. Like you could fit a whole soccer field in the courtyard because there's like fountains and there's sculptures and whatever. So it was all very distant. And most of the people were up on their balconies. It was really cool. But in general, that would, and it was with people from the National Symphony and the Kennedy Center Opera. Like it was a fine gig. Like it was good, but it was really emotional for me to be there. And it was emotional. You could tell for the audience. And it was like, there was like genuine, it was, these are all five of us have been very blessed and have been around the block like many, many, many times. And this is not, these circumstances would not make our career highlight list, to say the least. And yet it's a gig I'll never forget. And not that none of them had played gigs and Trey did the beat, but it's just like the having Fish back when, again, it was like, there was no guarantee that all four of those guys were going to be alive at the tail end of this. Not that we're at the tail end yet, but there's like, there's a 100% chance that all of them thought at least at some point, and especially early on when we just didn't know what we didn't know. Right. I am reminded of an encounter that was 20 years ago, actually, almost 20 years ago, with Billy Martin, when they did 3 shows. MMW did 3 shows at Tonic, and this was a fundraiser for Tonic. And I was sitting next to John Medeski's at that point fiance Sarah, and we knew each other a little bit, like had hung out a number of times. And I asked her how the first 2 shows were. This was the third night. And she said the band was like really playing well. And she said, but Billy Martin is like on fire. Like, I don't know what it is, but he sounds possessed. And I was like, oh, this is encouraging. So we then, the show starts. We're in the second row at Tonic, which was like a shoebox to begin with. And sure enough, like I spent the entire set staring at Billy Martin, and there was like this intensity coming from him that I had never heard from him. And he was already one of my 2 favorite drummers, on the planet, along with Fishman. So at set break, I talked to Billy and I said, hey man, like, you, what is going on? Like you saw, I told him what Sarah had said, and I told him how great he sounded. And very, very unassumingly, he was just like, yeah, he's like, recently, he's like, said, thank you very much. That means a lot. He said, recently, I realized that I'm just like, I'm never guaranteed another gig like with this band or any other band. So I just like decided that I just need to like absolutely go for it every single night. And I was like, holy shit, like, there it is, right? Yeah. So the way Fish came out of the gates reminded me of that interaction with Billy Martin, which I talked to him about, like, I don't know, a year or 2 ago when I played with them, and he had no recollection of it, but he was beaming. Like, he was like, oh, that's awesome. Thank you for reminding me of that. I was like, that was one of the most like pivotal moments of my life, and I was already a professional musician, but that was just kind of like, there, what a call to action, right?
Right.
And it felt like Fish was individually and collectively, I can't imagine how they possibly couldn't, as humans, be in that same mode coming out of this, because you don't need to be a musician to understand this, right? Like anything that you get to do, although some people got to do a much closer, version of what they normally do, through the pandemic, like on Zoom, whatever, than musicians, where technology is kind of catching up, but the latency and all that, like you can't do Fish over Zoom, right? Like you can't. So I have to imagine that was a major factor in them being so cohesive right away. And I think that again, I haven't talked to anybody either directly in the band or even tangential to the band that
Sure.
so this is all just made up. But I, just to be clear about that, but I also have a feeling that that's exactly what has led to first sets being like, so much more creative than usual. You just never know when there are so many first sets that I saw in 3.0, which, like, of course I was there. I was happy I was there. And I know there are some people listening to this right now who have been able, because of where they live or their financial situation or whatever, that have been to like 3 shows ever. Right. Like, so it's like, but there are a lot of first sets that just like, that I never went back and listened to again because they were fine. It was just like a collection of songs that was played pretty well, that didn't really have anything that was that out of the ordinary, that unexpected. There was I think you can count the number of first sets this summer that really had nothing remarkable, like on like maybe one hand, right? I mean,
Right.
And there were some that were like the whole time was like, it took a left turn right out of the gate and just kept on doing that. But there was a lot of Nashville won, which was like not one of the better shows of the tour. Right. And there were some highlights, but not one of my favorites. Although it made compared to one of the other 4 shows I saw, Hershey won. It was like New Year's '95, but which of course the last time I was on was the day after Hershey won. I got to talk about that. But anyway, it was oh crap, what tune was it? Where they did it was free, where they they did a Trey has and forgive my guitar tech ignorance, I know none of it. I think it's cool as hell watching those videos, but I don't even try and retain any of it because it's not the world I live in.
I just like my jaws on the floor watching Trey like explain his rig, and I'm like, I don't understand the words, but just keep talking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't stop. Yeah,
just do it.
But in that free jam, Trey has some effect where it like doesn't just drop an octave. He like sounds like he's playing a bass. Page went way down low with his left hand, and then so there was like basically it was like 2D bass where like Page, Mike, of course, and Trey were all playing bass lines at one time. There was no melody. It was 3 bass lines all on top of one another with Fishman playing the groove. And that was when Don Hart, who I was at the show with, like we turned to each other and we were like, that's cool. Right. And so that was an unremarkable set from, in the grand scheme of things, of the tour, an unremarkable set from an unremarkable show on the tour. Like the very next night, second set was just fire, right?
Yeah.
And yet, that was a perfect example of kind of like a creative flash of brilliance where I'm sure there's no way that I've heard every free in 3.0, but like I would bet a lot of money. I probably heard all of them before that. I bet a lot of money that there's never been any segment where 3 of them played the bass at the same time, all crunched on top of one another. And it wasn't just the idea, it was like cool as hell. And then, and I don't even remember specifically how they got out of it, but then, but they did, actually I do, because it kind of, it emerged, and then it went to the 2-chord riff, which is always started by Mike. And then it was like, it was awesome. It was like people weren't walking out talking about the free, but that was just a perfect microcosm of like their creativity, and it happening in weird times and early in shows, and not just like waiting for like the big, whether it's like a set opener in the second set or like the 2 or 3 hole in the second set, just like stretching stuff out in weird places, doing weird things in weird places.
Well, yeah, and that's a really good point, and it kind of like gets into a couple of things I wanted to talk about. Like it reminds me of so the only shows I saw this tour were the Dix run, and I'd be curious your thoughts, kind of larger on in terms of that run. The first night, that was my first Fish show back since Dix 2019, and walking in, it's this highly emotional moment of like I'm back at my favorite venue to see Fish. Apologies to anyone who holds MSG in higher regard. I love MSG, but Dix is my home venue. It's a perfect place to see Fish in my mind. And I was really wondering what are we going to get from Fish on this Friday night show. In years past, I've seen Friday night shows at Dick's where I've been completely exhausted and almost incapable of seeing the final two shows of the run because they just come out so aggressively. And by the end of the first set, you're just like dripping sweat. But this first set was not like that from my perspective. It was a little bit slower. The sound, they had some issues to kind of figure out. It was a very windy night in there. But up until when they launched into foam, which I'm going to shout out to you. We talked about foam in Undermine season 1, and it completely made me rehear and rethink that song. So hearing that song live, I think it was only the third time I've ever seen foam. You don't see it a lot anymore. It was a really exciting moment. And obviously that set ends with an incredible 22-minute Carini, but leading up to it, it was a lot of like fits and spurts. Like they'd play, a decent song, but then they'd kind of play a little bit slower, and it seemed like the band needed a little bit of time to connect. But there were two moments in that set that don't get talked about, kind of like this free that you're talking about. One was there was a modulation midway through Timber that sounded like they were going to take Timber out into some sort of a jam, some sort of like an excursion. It ended up at a 7 or 8 minute long version, but there's like a 90-second segment within that is just fascinating playing. It's really like minor keyed, but it's like melodic in a really interesting way. And then a song I never want to hear at a Fish show, Yarmouth Road, was played. And there's a moment for like 45 seconds where Trey and Mike are just locked into this like rhythmic back and forth. And it sounds like they can break free. And if, they break free out of Yarmouth Road, it's going to be one of those, it's almost going to be like a 47-minute Soul Planet where people are like, well, they jammed out Yarmouth Road and it was awesome, but it was still Yarmouth Road type of thing. And I heard that in those shows, and then I heard them in re-listen, and it, struck me in terms of what I was hearing throughout the larger tour. And it kind of made me think about where Fish was towards the tail end of this 3.0 era before the pandemic, specifically like fall 2019, if you can call that a tour. It was a run of shows in the Northeast where that creativity within songs seemed to be missing to a certain degree. And I almost wonder if the band subconsciously needed a slight break and a slight reset. They'd introduced so many new songs to us between 2016 and early 2020. And then they kind of needed to figure out which of these songs should be highlighted, but also how do we incorporate new songs or new sounds, into our jamming that can kind of kickstart us again. And that's how I've heard. And I feel like I'm hearing this tour is almost like a reset, like you got in 2.0, a reset like you got in 3.0, but where especially early 3.0, you mentioned, needed time to get the band back to higher quality playing level. So you had a lot of first sets that were just recitals, and you had second sets where the most improvisation you could hope for was like a 5-minute ambient outro that would be extended slightly longer than the night before. Here, the band was coming in with a lot of highs that were built up from 2015, 2017, late 2018, took a deep breath, had that moment of realization of like, we may never get to do this again, and then came in with that sort of aggressiveness. Do you hear like something similar? Like, is that kind of strike a chord with you?
Yeah, yes, it does. I actually tweeted right before the second set of Hershey 1 went completely off the rails. Like when they did what they did with That Soul Planet, which was like 15 minutes, and it was like there was some really interesting stuff in there. And then what came after Soul Planet? It was also very good.
I think it went into NICU.
Sorry, it was No Man and then Soul Planet was what I was thinking of. Right. Yeah, like those that 30-minute stretch to open that second set would have been 30 of the best minutes of the entire tour of summer 2016. I tweeted, it almost does. If Soul Planet can do that, it doesn't matter what they play. And then they were like, hold my beer. And then, and then I regretted those words. So yeah, it's like, I especially don't like to be told I'm full of shit, but I like to be told a little bit more gently than they did for the rest of that evening. But no, I think that I think that you're right, and a couple of things that I would note is that they recorded Sigma Oasis right before, not right before the pandemic, but leading up to the
Sure.
pandemic, and that I think that album is fantastic, and
Yeah.
it's like I God, compared to Big Boat, I mean, Big Boat, it's not just, I don't really love the songs on Big Boat as overall, and also I don't enjoy I don't enjoy anything about that album compared to
Me
all of
either.
the other albums.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, that's so enough about that. Sigma Oasis, everything that I hated about Big Boat, I think is like way better. And then you hear them say that they actually recorded this all in the same room, and that they were like playing and they were not in isolation, and and it all kind of made sense. So I think that then, and then like Page layering synthesizers, on top of it afterwards. I just think that it seems like they were already very linked up creatively, like heading into, this, and like the tweezer from 12:30:19 at MSG. It's like there was like they were coming in on a hot
Oh
streak.
yeah, there were moments. Yeah, yeah.
Yep. And then but then again, I don't know any of this, but I've got to imagine that in this pandemic, when everybody was just at home, that those dinner and a movies, like the band had to have watched a whole bunch of those. Because like what else are they gonna do? They're at home, right? Like just like the rest of us, they're not doing anything. I would be surprised if they didn't watch a bunch of those dinner and the movies, which, like I don't know, 7/21/97 Virginia Beach. There's just all sorts of like random creative flare ups, in terms of like in the Bowie intro. Not that it was weird to have creativity in the Bowie, but like the Birdland jam, that like the full thing that sprouted up and then like bubbled back down. And so I think that they heard a lot of examples of that from their history, which again, I also don't know this, but I'm guessing that they're not like, regularly, like pulling up like, like, I don't know, 12/11/95 to like, listen to the Stash because it's really good. I mean, I don't get the impression that they do that much, as much as we do.
Yeah.
But they were kind of getting like a tour de force of that Deer Creek 95 show, of of August 93 or July of 93 at Great Woods. There's just there was a lot of that, and also some of the great stuff from 3.0 as well. And I'm guessing that played a little bit of a role in it as well. And a lot of those shows, those early shows, they in sort of 7/8/94, their weird set list construction. I mean, like that second set on that 7/8/94 is like, like the centerpiece is a Stash, like in the second set. That was like, that's a first set tune in 1994, right. Like almost always. So and then like the Yem Frankenstein Yem segues are just like sound like they were like that they all brainstormed it and came up with it, and then like
and Ariba that nobody talks about because of the Alive One Stash and the Yem Frankenstein Yem.
Yep,
like, I remember watching that. It's like the most disjointed. If they played that set list in a second set in 2021 and didn't do that type of jamming, I think that people would have, they would throw a fit over, because it's like, I don't have it in front of me, but like you have like Reba, and then you have like, or Rift opens it up, and then it goes to like Sample in a Jar. Like if they did Rift to Sample in a Jar to open the second set, people would lose their minds. But yeah, you have like, it's a good point, because I can't see Trey or Mike or any of them curating next week we're going to show 7/21/97. But I have to imagine from like a a quality control standpoint, that the band had to at least be alerted that we're thinking about doing this. Are you okay with this being? And part of my inclination to that is it took them almost a year to play a 2.0 show,
right?
Which I've got to imagine was cleared by the band for a variety of reasons.
I bet you're right.
And as a result of that, you're right. Like they're seeing, dinner and a movie, I think that there were 35 in total. You're basically getting like a year's worth of Fish 3.0 webcasts, but instead of like Hershey Night 1, Nashville Night 1, you're getting like if every single show of the tour was the best show of the tour.
Mm-hmm.
I could nitpick. There were a few dinner movies that I wish they hadn't shown, but that's neither here nor there at this point. I was grateful for it, but I feel like, the band, wherever they were checking in, had to, and I almost wonder if it was the sense of like, you remember the live Fish series that came out in 01,
Mm-hmm.
02?
Sure.
I seem to recall the second set of volumes, 7 through 12, that the band had like specific word on, and like they all picked a volume to utilize. I could be wrong on that. Maybe that was later in the larger set, but I feel like they at that point in time had a say in terms of, we're opening the archives. These are the shows that we were going to present of what was our best performances
Mm-hmm.
in the first 17 years of our career. And I've got to imagine listening back to that following 99 and 2000, which have moments of kind of creative lulls, obviously great moments, Cyprus, Japan, so on and so forth, but like moments of creative lulls. I have to imagine that informed the band when they come back in 2.0. That winter tour is, high quality jamming and high quality improvisation from day one in the forum. I've got to imagine that informed them in the same way that this did.
I bet you're right. Yeah, it's the Fish at their best for me, is, which is obviously all I care about, is risk taking. It's like, and that's also why there are some shows that are better than others, like for my tastes. And I will say that, the band very specifically, they collectively curated what went on a live one.
Right.
They listened, like because they used to give a lot of interviews, and they talked in interviews over and over again about the process of choosing all of those. And I'll just say that that for the most part, those of us who spent way too many hours back then, like seeing shows, listening to tapes, making tapes, talking about tapes, like, all of the above, that it was pretty much what they chose was in line with what we kept yapping about on rec.music.fish, which to me implies that there is not that anyone's opinion is right or wrong, but I think to me it's pretty obvious when everything is really clicking with the band, and I think that them listening to some so many examples of that. And again, I don't know that any of them tuned in a single time, but I'm guessing, like, also you're talking, speculating that they had a say. They were all stuck at home. So, like, I'm guessing they had a say. Like, what the hell else were they doing? I mean, it's like, it's not like they were like trying to figure out how to get, move their team of 30 that they manage at their office job to, like, smoothly segue over into commute, into online meetings.
Right.
I mean, they were musicians who couldn't do what they do. So it's like, and they are rich, so they had people bringing them stuff. Like, they weren't. I doubt that they were like going to the grocery store on April 1st, 2020. It's like so. So yeah,
just imagining now like a silver tray coming into Trey's man cave with like a VHS of 7/21/97, with like 3 other summer 97 shows, like choose Mr. Anastasio, and he like sits down and watches it in a darkened room. And
I loved all that early stuff. I mean, obviously the stuff that I was at was great, but also just, the only times I was ever disappointed, it was actually, I could tell that normalcy was coming back when I first started getting disappointed by some of the selections. It's just like the entitlement was coming back. It was like, we're gonna make it, yeah, we're gonna, we almost lost the democracy, which actually still is probably going to happen. And there's like a pandemic that almost killed all of us. But like, I'm actually I'm actually actively disappointed by what they selected for this week, and that feels good. Yeah, because I have no reason to be. So 7/8/94 that we talked about before was my first ever jaded moment at a show, which that was my third show, and that was the third show that I saw them open with Llama. Like Llama, and I love Llama, but I was kind of looking for like anything other than llama, and then they rip into llama, and it's like, it wasn't just llama, it was like a 94 llama. I mean, it's like, let's
Right.
go. I mean, it's
This is
awesome.
when they played llama.
But I was just like, I was like looking for like anything other than like, give me a chalk dust, give me a buried alive, give me a runaway Jim foam, like what, and then when it segued into nitrous, and then I saw like Trey like kind of getting comfortable, and I was like, what? And then the Gamehenge narration started, and then I was no longer jaded. So yeah,
I always say there's nothing I like being wrong about more than Fish.
right.
And like moments like that, like perfectly describes it, where you're like, okay, I've seen llama 3 times and I've seen 3 shows. Like, can we just get some variety here? But of course, that's the moment, because the second time you're like, oh, this is kind of a weird coincidence. But then the third time you're like, are you guys just like playing a joke on me? But the joke is that they're going to play Gamehenge right after that. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I felt like, just like thinking about the dinner movies, like watching, 2 that stood out for me were the Deer Creek 95, which you mentioned. Summer 1995 is my favorite Fish tour of all time. And like just seeing what those 4 guys looked like when they played a jam like that David Bowie. Because, we don't have a lot of video of that tour. There's not really a ton of like even pictures online of that tour.
Right.
And it's a very specific looking tour. The band is like at this weird point where like Trey is starting to wear jeans at some shows and like starting to look presentable on stage, but then also wearing those gold pajama pants, and like Mike is wearing those like oversized white jean shorts with a t-shirt, like, and to me, like, I don't know where they were at financially in 1995, but I have to imagine that was like around the time where it was like, okay, we only have to play 1 month in the first 9 months of this year to survive.
Yeah.
And we can throw our creative ideas, at the wall and just see what sticks, because people will keep coming back for more. And there had to be like a lot of like freedom in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were like in their early 30s at that point in time. So, they're just at such an interesting point in life in summer 95, and seeing that and like watching 3 hours of what they looked like. But also the 99 show from Polaris, because another tour that I just find fascinating. You really start to hear and see the darkness kind of creep into the band.
Mm-hmm.
And like they've been touring
and the
amphitheaters and the scene. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just like, you see those 2 shows back to back, and there's like enthusiasm, youthful excitement at Deer Creek. And then Polaris is kind of like another gig where like pretty much every song they strike gold, but it's almost like they're leaning back, allowing the music to take them in such an interesting way. So, seeing those was, for me, I'm, deeply familiar with those shows, but to watch them for the first time was such an exciting experience. And I have to imagine if the band tuned in at all, it had to be something similar for them.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it was a real trip for some of those early I mean, getting to see 7, 8, 94, which was my 3rd show. Like that was obviously the first time that I had seen it since that night. Like that was pretty incredible. Like getting to watch that stash, and the fact that like that the, that's the stash from a live one. And, Trey has referenced it repeatedly, hasn't in a long time, but back in the 90s when he would talk about tension and release a lot. And he talked about he had a column, by the way, in Guitar World magazine that only lasted like 2 or 3 installments. I was buying every Guitar World magazine because it was amazing. It was Trey talking about tension and release, and he referenced, I don't know if it was in that column, I think it was, but he referenced that stash. But the fact that like the lights were basically out, and it was just like under lighting that was kind of flashing up, and then every light bulb that the band owned, and they borrowed a few during the jam, like all went on at once. Like, it was cool because I didn't remember that detail of the visual. Right. And I could sing, I won't, but I could sing you that stash from beginning to end, and it would be, I mean, the exact tempo, the exact everything from start to finish. It would be the exact length that it is. I mean, I could hear the whole thing in my head. That's how many times I've listened to it. So it's cool to get to see it again.
That's me with the 9/14/99 AC/DC bag. I listened to it about 10
There you
days
go.
ago on its anniversary, and it was just like in my head and like, out loud, like, okay, here's where they stop and here's what the riff they come back in on and all that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, like, so we're talking about, like seeing all this past Fish via dinner and movies, what happened in 2021. Can you compare this tour to any tours in years past? Like, is there any sort of alignment that you hear between this tour and what they were doing, either 3.0 or 2.0 or 1.0?
Boy, that's a good question. Um, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the it was by far the most similar to a bunch of tours in 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it was a better version of a lot of tours in 3.0. If that makes sense. They there is with some exceptions like the Deer Creek Simple, there was not a lot of rhythmic. I'm such a nerd. When the Carini in Atlantic City, like Fishman slipped into 6/8 for like 12 seconds, like at the end, and I was like, "Ooh!" And then then it went away. But like their jams nowadays are 99.9% in 4/4. Like they don't,
Right.
they don't, and they'll go like double time or halftime or so that's unlike a lot of a lot of the early, like 93, there was tons of segues and pushing and pulling of tempo. 94 was also a lot of like stopping in 94, but not like, and then 95 was like a ton of cacophonous rhythmic improv. And then it actually starting in 96 is when it kind of started to, settle. 97, there's not a lot of rhythmic stuff. But anyway, the fact that they started jamming things in the first set again reminded me of of 2.0.
Sure.
Just in the sense that you never quite knew when they were going to extend something, and it started getting regular, right? And even I obviously love that, but some of my favorite tours were not that way. I mean, I don't think people realize how predictable the set list could be in like 93, 94. Like there was like and I tweeted like right as the tour started, and I retweeted myself, which is always a classy move. Later in the tour, just that like actually repeats are good. Because I think that I think that a repeat, when you start repeating tunes, you start to get like fresh perspectives on them, and like from like in terms of like from the band, right? When you I mean, hell, that's true of classical music where everything's written out, but especially for improv, you just kind of start to tunes almost get like momentum creatively, and it's almost like you pick up where you left off. Like so much of summer 95, all those crazy tweezers, it's like it's kind of just like one long tweezer that they kept taking like 5-day breaks in the middle.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I also tweeted at one point that I thought it was bullshit that they had only played 2 tweezers in however many shows, and then like every person on Fish Twitter who doesn't like tweezer decided to tweet at me, which was awesome. People made the argument, which I understand, like it's more special if it doesn't happen. I was like, what actually would be really special is if they played it every night. I think that would be special too. So like literally every night just to see, and I'm actually not even kidding. It'd be interesting to see them play like Soul Planet every night for a 10 show tour. Not that I'm rooting for that, but just something to, I would be fascinated. Or if they like announce the set list ahead of time sometime, for one set, just said, here's what we're playing, and then figure out how you're going to get from, connect this dot to that dot. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I think it was a lot similar to 3.0 in a lot of ways. One other point is that that in a lot of 3.0, when it wasn't creatively clicking, I think like the creative crutch, which I've talked about this before, it tends to be that the band like segues up a perfect fourth, and then they do a bliss jam of some kind, where it's just
Yeah.
kind of like they you know the modulation is 9 out of 10 times is the same, and then it goes to major, and then it's real pretty, and then they do a little tension and release thing, and sometimes that's melodically based, other times it's just like more rhythmically based, tension and release, and then it kind of dissolves. And some of those, like those aren't always my favorite. In the middle of it, I love it. I love it, love it. But in terms of, it's just kind of like, like, okay, it's like, it feels like, it can kind of feel like you're on a date and you just run out of things to talk about. It's just kind of like, and then they're like, oh, let's do a bliss jam. It's like, this tour had some more of those early on, but then towards the middle and then end of the tour, it felt like there was way less of the not really sure where this is going, so let's go to the go-to. It kind of felt like it was much more mobile and much more agile creatively, and just more patient, even though it didn't take a long time for them to get going necessarily in the jams. But that was my perception.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I was thinking about the Carini that ends the first set at Dick's, goes through this. It's the only jam from that run that I can think of that there was a moment where they consciously said, let's go to the Bliss Jam. And part of that is because it's a set one closing song and you kind of have to end it on a high note. But to get there, they went through 8 or 9 minutes of really inventive kind of communication and back and forth. And there were moments during it where, I was looking at my watch just to be like, okay, I think we're getting close to set one curfew here. They need to leave the stage at some point, but also this feels like a jam that you would hear midway through a second set. And then there was one moment where Trey just kind of, he found the exit, and he found it to like, this peaking jam glory, and it was great. But the other example is the Everything's Right from the following night, which opened the second set of the second night at Dick's, which was one of my favorite. It was probably my favorite jam I saw the entire weekend. There's a moment around like 14, 15 minutes, I believe. I could be off by a minute or two, but where it sounds like they're moving into a peaking moment within the jam. And instead of fully peaking it, they find an exit back to more rhythmic type of playing, more kind of just riff based back and forth communication. And it leads to one of my favorite parts of the whole summer. Around 19, 20 minutes, they just lock into this groove. And, it's the moment where like Kuroda's lights descend so that they're like scraping their heads. And like, they're kind of, it's those white lights that are just like dancing out into the crowd. The whole like top part of the stage at Dick's is completely dark and it's just lit over the band. And I remember looking out, like there was like a roar that built through the crowd at that moment. And you don't get that without moving away from the Bliss Jam. You
correct.
Because the Bliss Jam is so satisfying.
It is.
But when it's forced, it loses. And, and I feel like they got to this towards the tail end of the Baker's Dozen, where every single jam had to go in this specific direction that was really satisfying, but also creatively there was something else there. And that was what separated this tour to me from what we've heard recently. I certainly agree with you. I don't know if I'd put this on par with, anything that we'd heard from a like larger tour standpoint in 1.0. I think summer 95, I think, fall 94, December 95, fall 97, those tours really show a band that is kind of on the cutting edge and playing like walking off a cliff and seeing when they fall. And when they fall or when they keep themselves afloat is really the exciting moments. And they're kind of reinventing in those tours what is potential with Fish and like what Fish actually means musically. This felt to me like fall 13 and summer 15, in the sense that you had a lot of nostalgic vibes throughout the tour where the band was doing things that we hadn't heard them do consistently in quite some time. But in addition to that, they're kind of charting a path going forward musically that may not be revolutionary for the band, but at least keeps this narrative and keeps this, larger thing going for another 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
One thing I want to ask you, but I want to transition quickly. So we are recording this. Episode 3 of Undermine season 2 has just been released, and you are featured prominently here in Undermine season 2, a season which we are documenting the larger community. And I wanted to get a sense, like, you have some really great moments in this season that have happened thus far, as well as that are coming up here in future episodes, which I know because I helped to make the show. You haven't heard these yet.
Right.
You graciously gave me a couple hours earlier in the summer and gave us some great deep dives, great stuff. I kind of wanted to ask you, just like, can you go through your larger fish journey, how you got into fish, what your experience was first getting into them, and kind of where you're at right now as a fan and as a listener?
Sure. I the summer of '93, I was at Tanglewood as a student, and my roommate that summer, Russell Beebe, who is still my best friend to this day, he and I were playing in the orchestra there together, and he had seen 5/8/93 up at UNH, which like I would
It's a great show.
I would do unspeakable things to be able to like retroactively add that to my to my experiences list. But the he had Junta on CD that summer, and he played it, and it was like, it was fine. It didn't really grab me. It kind of did, but kind of didn't. I certainly wasn't grabbing it ever, rather than a Mahler symphony or Led Zeppelin or U2 Zooropa. Was like playing like parts of that on a repeat that summer. And then I was a freshman at Northwestern, and Russell was a senior in high school. And I called him in October and was just to say, hey, what's up? And I was trying to get him to come to Northwestern, which he actually ended up doing. I asked him what he was doing for New Year's, and he told me he was going to see Fish at the Worcester Centrum. And I was like, oh, actually, that would be fun. Can you see if you can get me a ticket? And he said, sure, let me see what I can do. And then he ended up getting 10th row center, like dead center on the floor, like right there. I was like mere feet away from the first time I ever heard Harry Hood was the New Year's '93 Harry Hood, and there were only like, including a security guard, there were like 10 humans between me and Trey. That was that was the first, and so it's all been downhill from there. Like my fandom peaked like 2.5 hours in, but that like it everything about that night completely blew me away. It's the way that they played everything, how incredibly tight they were, how complex what they were playing was, and how effortless it was. The tension and release, the dynamics. They sang Amazing Grace. They did a Ginseng Sullivan with like washboard and like the acoustic setup. The list just went on and on and on. And then my second show, which was in Toronto on 4/6/94, I and some friends, we drove 10 hours each way. It was a Wednesday in the middle of the school week at a school where you're supposedly like have to take things seriously, or they don't like. Right. Yeah, but we were like, well, not really. And then like my third, and then that summer. I saw 7, 8, and 9 at Great Woods, and then 7/10 at SPAC, and then 7/13, which is Big Birch in Patterson, and then 7/16 at Sugarbush. Wow. So it was like, the first chance that I got was because I had actually gone east just before. I sadly missed 6/18/94, which is one of the best shows I ever played. But because I was in Boston, where my parents still live, not in Chicago anymore. But like my first opportunity, I saw 5 shows in 8 days. It was just like, and it was a lot cheaper to do it then. And then I was off and running at that point. It was like that. I've never had, before my first Fish show, Before I graduated from high school, I had seen the Boston Symphony perform somewhere over 200 times.
Wow.
Like with at Tanglewood and at Symphony Hall in Boston. I had seen the New York Philharmonic, I had seen the Cleveland Orchestra, I'd seen the Israel Philharmonic. I mean, like make a long list. I had seen the Kronos Quartet and Yo-Yo Ma many times, and I mean, just like I was an embarrassment of riches from being a student at Tanglewood for 4 summers and having parents who were so supportive. I had also seen rock shows. Like I had seen Aerosmith, 3 times, Guns N' Roses twice, Metallica, AC/DC, Faith No More, and I'm, Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins, just like all of these shows. The reason I'm saying all this is that like I had seen this, like I had seen 300 concerts, like of like the highest possible magnitude, and jazz too, Wynton Marsalis, and that Phish show was like moved me in a way like I had never been moved before. And I had already, that was 7 years. So 7 years after I decided to become a professional musician. Wow. I mean, like I'm already like all in, and that Phish show, like it rewired like my soul. Like it was instant, just like, struck by lightning. And I'll never forget that first show. They walked out. Well, you were talking about their attire in '95 before. They walked out for that that 90 in '93. We got to see a little bit of that with the Greatwood show in '93 that they played for Dinner and a Movie, where, as I described it on Twitter, it looked like they had been up all night long at like a Dungeons and Dragons tournament, and then they just like stumbled on stage.
Oh, wait, there's a show.
And I had seen like, AC/DC, who's like opening with Thunderstruck, and they're coming out in choreo, Angus is up there and he's like, he's doing the metal horns while he's tapping, finger tapping the intro, and then he like jumping off of the second story and landing on the downbeat as there's like flames shooting out of the stage. He's got stretch pants on, it's like everything was, and it was awesome. It was awesome, but everything was choreographed. And then like these, and that was the true for Guns N' Roses, and it was true for Metallica. It was true for all of them. And then like Phish, just like, these just like 4 just like jackass looking guys just like walk out and they're just like, hey, and then just rip into Llama. And I was like, what is happening? Like, it was just as powerful as the cannons and the flames and all of that. And there was none of it, which was also like remarkable to me with my, metal / hard rock, background, and really like going to like shows, rock and roll spectacles. So
it's funny because like my first exposure to seeing what Phish looked like was Bittersweet Motel. My mom gave it to me for my birthday in the spring of 2001, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And I don't think she had any idea what she was getting me into, or what she was getting like our larger like family unit into, with like how much this band would play a part of my life. But I remember like a similar reaction. I'd heard of Phish. I'd probably heard a song here or there, but like in that early moment of the documentary, they're walking on stage and I was like, they're just guys. Like,
yep.
And this is like fairly well-dressed Phish compared to 1993. Yes. But I was like,
not a high bar, but yes.
But I was like, they're just guys. Like, what is going on here? Why is everyone obsessed with this band? And then, that became a huge appeal to me, that it was like, there's a humility in a sense to them of just, we're just regular dudes that come on stage, and then here's how we play music, and that speaks for itself.
And you meet them, and it's the same way. If anybody hasn't had a chance to meet any of them, every single one of them, you meet them in real life, and they're the same way. They're just like super approachable. They're just like when I played with the National Symphony with Trey at the Kennedy Center, 8 years ago now. The principal trombone, Craig Mulcahy, said to me. He said, because Trey was backstage and his dressing room door was open, and he was like posing for pictures with people. He was like, he was talking with anybody and there was a lot of like, oh my God, my nephew is going to like die. If I get a photo, it's like, and he was standing back there talking to everyone. And Craig, the principal trombone, said, He said that is the nicest millionaire I've ever met. Like, on this gig or off of this gig, because he was just like, he's like, is he that approachable all the time? I was like, yes. Every time I've ever talked with him, he is that approach. He's like the same guy all the time, which is great.
So I'm curious, like, so you have this early, just amazing experience with him where like the band doesn't, it's kind of a common tale. Like it's such a unique sound that comes out of like, any early studio record of theirs compared to the sounds of the time. Well, then you see them live and suddenly you're all in, and you're getting into them at a time when like every second show that you see, every second or third show is going to be a classic. One of your first 10 shows is 7/16/94, which would later be released. Before that, you got 7/13, 7/8, 12/31/93. You're seeing amazing Fish shows early on. Was there a moment as you were going through, because you're getting into Fish at a time when like the core fan base is hearing a specific sound that in just 4 years is going to change on purpose and drastically. Was there ever a moment, and then obviously beyond 97, you get into these darker years and then kind of the revitalization of early 3.0, where Fish felt a little bit more tame in some ways, even though it was very, joyful at that point in time. But was there any point where you felt like you were drifting away from the band, or the band was drifting away from you, or, from your perspective, the music wasn't connecting the way that it did early on or the way that it does now?
Not really. I mean, I guess the closest thing to that would be like early 3.0, because I wasn't seeing very many shows, and like the shows that I saw, now that changed in fall 2013, which I had the good fortune of. For me, I mean, I know multiple people who have seen 200 shows and they've all been in 3.0, and I'm like, wow, can we trade? I would like to trade disposable income accounts with you. That's awesome. Because back when I did all that, it was like, yeah, shit was cheap. But no, which is awesome. I bet if I had been a late bloomer, I'd be doing the same thing. Like just kind of like, like let's go. But like fall 2013, I saw like 6 or something, which was very good timing. That was right before my son was born. Yeah. But like, before that, it was like, I didn't really feel like I was drifting because it was still so cool to have them back, but like summer 2012, it's like, it's Fish. It's a lot better than not being Fish, but it, a lot of it was, this will hopefully not ruffle any feathers. But I was, last weekend or 2 weekends ago, I saw the Zappa band and King Crimson here in DC, and afterwards I was walking out with my good friend Colleen Heller-Stein, who I serve on the Mockingbird board of directors with, and we were talking about how like unbelievably, like shockingly tight both of those bands are. And I mean, I'm talking rhythmically, I'm talking like matching articulations and note weight and releases and dynamically. And I mean, it's just like it's insane how polished these two bands are playing like the composed portions of what they were playing. And I said to her, I said that, what we just saw in terms of like, well, it's not even type 1 because it's not jamming, just like execution of their songs. That's why I don't understand why some people get upset when people criticize like how Fish plays the composed parts of their songs.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that I'm confused as to why someone doesn't care, because like there's like 1,000 reasons to not care, right? I mean, if like doesn't make your radar, don't let some like tuba nerd talk you into the fact that, oh, actually you should be really focused on this part that's going to actually leave you disappointed. Like, but the fact that they can't even see how someone could value that and then find it lacking, that's the weird part to me. It's like this myopic view. Like you have to, like it's binary. You're either happy that they're playing or you're not, and that there's no wiggle room for, I mean, You want to talk more about like 1994, like, Foam, like, good God. Like, I mean, just what they used to do with that song and what they used to be able to do with that song at like triple piano, like so soft that it's like a whisper, and Fishman and Mike underneath are playing verbatim. It's like they are playing full volume groove and that they have simply turned it down, right? I can't tell you how many times as a teacher I have like played like, I don't know, like Run to the Hills by, like Iron Maiden. And then I'll like off of my phone and I'm like, I'll say to the student who's, usually they're young, they never heard Iron Maiden before. I was like, that guy sounds pretty pissed, right? And they're like, yup. And then I'm like, yeah, it's like, and he's a millionaire, but he's still pissed. He's actually pissed for good reason. But anyway, that's beside the point. And then I was like, and then I turn it way down to like where there's just one volume bar left. And then I'm like, he still sounds pretty pissed, right? And then they look at me like, yeah, of course, right? And then I'm like, okay, your job on the tuba is to be able to play anything at any volume without changing anything. Like when it gets loud, it tends to get heavier and it tends to get like the, more accent, like harder edges. No, all I did was ask you to play the guitar or the ride cymbal, like to make it louder, not to make it louder and a little slower or louder and more labored or louder and less listening across the band for, etc. And like 94, they had the ability to like on a swivel, they could all, and but also cohesively, because I don't remember what the stat is, like the number of times that they played David Bowie in 1994 would like shock people. I mean, I mean, it's like almost as many as were played in all of 3.0 combined. They played just in 1994. And so again, the repeats are a good thing. So again, I'm not trying to convince anybody that they should like, be like disappointed that like that Trey in A Letter to Jimmy Page, is like, it's like the riff is dun 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 dun, and he's like da 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 da. He's not dun da 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 da. He's actually leaving notes out, and it's still like really kind of disjointed and awkward and heavy, and there's no flow. And if you were to slow it down, use a practicing tool like Tonal Energy Tuner, I'm saying if he were to do this and practice and slow it down to half speed, he would hear that there were certain notes that were shifting way early or way late. Back when I first started listening to the band, if you slow that stuff down, it's like red light on, meaning like recording session, like, okay, and I'm producing, I'm like, okay, we got it. We need one more for safety, as you say in the business, because in case the producer's wrong, you don't want to then go home and then be like, oh shit, we don't have it. So you get two of them to make sure that you've got one. But that was what they used to do regularly every single night. And so it's different how things, and I sometimes wonder how my first impression of the band would be different. I would still be knocked out, but it would be very different than what I got dropped into in 93, 94, 95, where everything that I was spending like insane amounts of tuition at Northwestern to try and master on the tuba, they were doing right in front of me as individuals and collectively at the highest possible levels, the same levels that I was seeing the Chicago Symphony down the street do. One of the best orchestras in the world, and it just happened to be like this improvisational rock band doing it. And now it's now it's different. So yeah, it's like it's this weird thing, and people tend to get, I don't know if you've noticed, but people can get like really mad if you point out that like that Trey's not playing all the notes in A Letter to Jimmy Page. It's and then it's like my favorite is you should sell your tickets to someone who still likes the band, where it's like,
right.
Yeah, there we go. Cool. Good talk.
Well, it's interesting because like you talk about like when you were dropped into Fish and like the journey you've gone on since then. And like, there were points in early 3.0 that like we could do a whole like hour and a half on like what was going on between 2009 and 2012. Personally, I find it really fascinating because you don't have a ton of examples of bands that break up in the way that they did, come back and essentially say indirectly, everyone has to be patient. We have to rebuild this from scratch. And then in front of everyone, rebuild it and reach a point where it may not be 1994 ever again, but it's to a point like fall 2013 where you can go to shows on a consistent basis and be like, I had my mind blown tonight in a way that I did not expect to 10 years ago. It's interesting because
Yes.
for me, I got into Fish during the hiatus, and I was remembering we didn't used to call it 2.0. It was post hiatus. And I
Right.
don't know why that memory came back to me. Like the 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 thing never really caught on. I feel like until they came back in '09 when we
Mhm.
had to suddenly distinguish between three eras, but it was Fish, and it was like very rudely told to you in 2003 as a total noob, you saw post hiatus Fish. And but like, my experience was collecting CDs and tapes and buying the live Fish series of the best eras of Fish, and buying literally, getting the best Fish shows that have probably ever been played in a lot of cases. And then my first show was February 20th, 2003, which is famously a very 2.0 show. It's a very dark show. There's a lot of jams that just go into like this hazy underworld type of terrain, the simple, the tweezer. There's a 22-minute Seven Below in midway through the second set. And it's one of those shows that, like, for someone like myself who had gotten into Fish hearing 94, 95, 97, and then seeing this Fish that literally walked on stage, didn't say a word to anyone, just dove in and decided, we're just going to experiment tonight. It was a jarring experience. And most of what I saw in 2.0 was jarring. I saw 8 shows, ended with Coventry. And I remember walking away, I was 19, being like, I just lost my favorite band forever. I don't know what I'm going to do musically. And I spent the next 5 years saying, okay, I love this about Fish. Where else do I get this in the larger, like, classic rock canon?
Yeah.
Found that, didn't really think I was going to get back into Fish. And then they came back in 2009, and that experience of like the joy of just having them back, that simple fact of like just the 4 guys walking on stage being healthy, but also really throwing myself into, how do we communicate about this band? How do we actually like tell their story? And understanding that part of that comes with criticism, and part of that comes with being able to discern between, this show had really great moments, but also moments that were lacking for this reason. But this show feels like a stronger statement of where the band was as a result of this. For me, I felt like it was around late 2009 where you started to hear the hints of who Fish was going to become 2 to 3 years from now. I think of the Gorge in 2009 is a really great statement.
Yeah, of course.
But you would hear a lot of like 2 steps forward, 4 steps back.
Yep.
2 steps forward, 4 steps back. And
I couldn't tell you what the shows after that amazing Gorge show were on that tour. I mean, like if I thought really hard, maybe, but like I don't think I could. It's like but the Gorge was that segue into rock and roll that took they were segueing. What is it? Or rock and roll into, what is it? Is it me?
Jeez, you're thinking 2011.
I'm thinking 2011. Sorry,
the rock and roll meat stick. Boogie on Reggae Woman.
I'm thinking of 2011, which was also in like kind of in that, it was like hit or miss period, but that was like they pull off like a 15-minute long segue. Into meat stick. It's like,
you hear it coming for like 5 or 6 minutes, and then suddenly they're there.
Yeah, and you're like, and then suddenly you're like in it. Yeah. I want to be clear about something that I think it is completely easily justified if you prefer the jamming of like summer 2021 to the jamming of summer 1995. Like I don't, but like the thing that baffles me about the people who are like sell your tickets to people who still like the band is that there are like the band is so different, which is the premise of your original question in this segment. They're so different that it's like it's weird to, and like there are some people, bless them, but like where they're like, there's not a single Fish song I don't like. It's like, holy crap, like that's like, I mean, just when you think about the fact that they cover everything from like heavy metal to bluegrass to acapella, like there's like a long list of genres that they and even like their originals now, it's like there are I've seen a lot of people. I'm not sure why I'm complaining about the complainers. It's very meta. But you know, that I've seen a lot of people say, you know, like, oh, you don't like the lyrics to Soul Planet, but like you're okay with the lyrics to Tweezer. Like, sure, man, you know, where like to me it's like, okay, when they wrote the lyrics to, like, you know, Tweezer, they weren't trying to write like really like heartfelt, deep, like moving on their
It
standing
was
on
like a
their own
sound
two
check
legs.
with like lyrics tacked onto it, you know?
Correct. Or Contact, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
I if maybe I've missed it, but like if like the tires making contact with the road, like I don't think that that represents like, you know, the capacity of humanity for love. And like, I mean, it's like it's a silly song about a freaking bus and like windshield wipers and like, you
I
know,
think
it's
the
like,
road is the soul planet, and the
yeah,
tires making contact with
but
it is.
so my point is that like you can like think that Soul Planet is really bad and think that Contact is really good. And it's just this weird thing where, and I'm not trying to convince you that Soul Planet is bad. If you don't think it is, then like awesome. Like who gives a shit what I think? But one is like trying to write like very serious, very like, you know, introspective lyrics, and one's trying to write really silly lyrics. So to point to silly lyrics to then to not justify the attempt at the serious ones, but to disqualify criticism of it, it's just like makes no sense at all. Like if you said these words out loud and heard yourself, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like, okay, there's like in someone's opinion, there's really forced imagery here. Well, but here's this song about like, you know, like tires are the things that make your bus go round. You know, it's like, well, but those are two totally different things. I don't understand how one could disqualify the other. I just wish that people could just be more comfortable. Now, this is easy for me because I have lots of followers on Twitter, and a lot of people disagree with my musical opinions. And like, even though there's like lots of room to, right? But like, I don't get brushed aside all that often, which I have to acknowledge, right? But I just wish people could be more comfortable with their opinions and then not claim that anybody who there are lots of things in the world that I don't know a lot about and that I just enjoy it. I'm trying to think of I'm pretty into food, but I don't know, like, you know, I'm not like way into food, sure. Right? There's some food that's like there's some techniques that a chef, if they could pull it off, is like mind-blowing, like with a knife or with whatever, which some of that's obvious to this tuba player. Others are not. I'm just like, wow, that's a really good dish. Whereas if you went to culinary school, you're like, oh, that's like, that right there is like top 2% execution of this dish. And then you could tell me how, and I'd be interested, right? But like the whole, like if I were to throw it back at you and just be like, you should just enjoy the meal, man. You know, it's like, well, okay, but like, why am I asking you to enjoy this thing how I enjoy it? That seems like the most selfish framing of consuming art or food that you could possibly have.
It's interesting that you make the analogy to food, because one of the formative experiences of my life was cooking in a high-end restaurant in Portland, Oregon for a year, which I was casually curious about the experience of, and kind of just decided for whatever reason when I was 25 I wanted to get my ass kicked every single night by incredible chefs, and I did. It was terrible and amazing all at the same time. But like that experience that you're talking about, where like I would plate a dish and feel really good about it, and then just get litany of criticism from my sous chef about, well, this is what went wrong with this. This is you took too long to cook this, which affected this part of the dish. It sat in the past too long because you weren't able to prepare it in time. You know, or you prepared it too quickly. Like all these minor critiques helped me on a larger scale to understand music. And I think Fish is one of those great bands for, I don't want to say nitpicking, but almost like analyzing down to the like minutia of like, what was this decision here versus this decision that could have been. What
That's because there's so much going on. There's so much going to analyze. Yes, I've already mentioned AC/DC. Sorry to cut you off. I love AC/DC. Like 3 chords, right? Greatest quote in the history of the music business. Angus Young was asked in an interview with the Boston Globe when I saw the Razor's Edge tour in '91. The writer said, how do you respond to the critics who say that like all 10 of your albums sound exactly the same? And he laughed, and then he said I would respond to them that we have actually made 12 albums and that they all sound exactly the same. He said we have a sound that we love, our fans love it, we're just going to
Why would we
keep
change
doing. And I love that. It doesn't need, there's not a lot to analyze with ACDC, right? And that's not to discount to discount it, because if it was easy to play 3-chord rock with like that, like kind of like me and Edge, like they wouldn't be famous, like everybody would be. Like they're amazing at that. But Fish, there's like so much to do there. It's like a game like soccer, where like I know a lot more than most people do about soccer because I love sports. But there are, one of the guys I used to be in Boston Brass with, he played like semi-professionally growing up in Costa Rica, and he ended up taking the music route like at age 18. But like he can break down strategy, like, you know, and I know like what a 2-2-4 is, you know, but like he can absolutely tell you how like the left, you know, back, like how their role changes subtly when it goes from this formation to this formation. He can tell you why the coach did that. He can tell you who's on the bench, like what, you know, I mean, like he's thinking like 8 layers in, and I can follow all the commentary on the TV, and I can even do a little bit of that on my own because I'm getting even more into it. But strategically, he could be a coach, right? And so it's like, but I don't ever tell him like, hey Jose, just enjoy the game, man. You know, it's like I think that's a cool aspect of it, is that you can like dissect the hell out of soccer strategy, where it seems like, you know, it's like, okay, you just try and kick the ball into the other team's net more than they do yours, and then somebody wins and somebody loses, right? Yes and no. And Fish is kind of like soccer in that sense, where there's so much strategically that is happening, and so there's a lot of places to take deep dives. And I enjoy taking deep dives. If you don't, that's cool. But like, I would never insist that you do. But it would be awesome if some people could, you know, stop insisting that people don't. Right. Although they never get mad if you take a deep dive and then you come out saying this was amazing. It's only if you take a deep dive and say this meal didn't work and here's why. And that's when there's like a small but vocal minority who are like, but you have food and you're not going to bed hungry, so shut the hell up. It's like, well, okay.
I think about that in the sense, I've been thinking about this idea a lot lately of forced evolution, like the practice of forced evolution that fish puts themselves through. And it's part of the reason I asked you the question earlier of like, were there ever moments where you like were this is not the band for me anymore? This because there's a lot you hear about, and I remember hearing about it when I first got into Fish in the early 2000s, was after 95 they weren't Fish anymore. You know, they were some other band. You know, you heard that from like early fans who loved what they were doing in 93, 94, 95. But then once they removed Trey being the centerpiece and the speed of the band, and he wanted to incorporate the other members, which led to this 97 kind of sonic revolution, there was a subsect of the community that said, okay, this is no longer the band for me. And to me, what I've always loved about Fish is that they force themselves to change at moments when we may not want them to. And I think like specifically of 2 great recent moments, the summer 2015 tour and the Baker's Dozen, 2 moments where on a collective level, there were things to criticize. I will fully agree. But on a collective level, those 2 tours felt really celebrated and really affirming in the moment of who Fish was and what Fish could be. Following that immediately, you get summer 2016, which to me is, I don't think that there's been a worse tour played since, I don't need, you know, you have to go a ways back. It's my least favorite tour of 3.0. And it seemed like a band that was completely different from what they were able to do a year earlier. Going forward 2 years, I like a lot of aspects of 2018, particularly love fall 2018, but it was clear that the Baker's Dozen kind of hung over them in like a minor way that Big Cypress did in 2000, where it was almost like, well, what do we do next? But out of that, you get 2016 leads into the Baker's Dozen. You get 2018 leads to, you know, what they played in that fall, but also kind of in a sense of where they're at right now, where from a curiosity and creative standpoint, they can peak a jam, but also what's on the other side of that jam? Where's the riff that's going to take us for the next 4 or 5 minutes? And what do we do after that? And those are always the really interesting moments. So, it almost seems to me from a critical standpoint, they're, and I don't want to blame them for this sort of thing, but they were almost like putting the criticism in our hands by saying, here's a great sound that we've achieved. They could have stopped at December 95 and just tried to recreate that tour after tour after tour in the same way that the Rolling Stones have tried to recreate Exile on Main Street and, Sticky Fingers, like over and over and over again for the last, 30 years in like a stadium setting, but they haven't. They want to take risks that, kind of lead to analysis, lead to criticism in a way that I think is part of the reason why we've been talking about Phish for the last hour and a half on the internet.
Yeah, that's well said.
I have one more question for you. Do you have time for one more question?
I got time for one more.
One more question. Perfect. So we've talked about summer 2021. We've talked about kind of our Phish journeys. One unique aspect of Phish is missing legendary shows. I had tickets for Tahoe this year, which I decided prior to them being changed to Shoreland that I was going to willingly skip the shows for a variety of reasons. I had a number of people coming out here for Dick's. I have a lot of work right now going on with Undermine, and I was just like, I just can't be away for 2 days. We have a newborn in the house. Like, I just can't leave my, the responsible
you had to work.
reasons.
You had to work on a Phish podcast, so you couldn't see legendary Phish shows. You need to question the decisions that have led you to this point, Brian.
So I said, I'm okay with this. I've missed good shows in the past. And, in my mind, I was like, how great can this be? I know that they're playing a great tour, but I knew I wasn't seeing Deer Creek night one. I was okay missing that. I'm sitting on my couch watching Shoreline night one, and we know what happened. They play an excellent, excellent first set. One of my favorite stashes that has been played in the last 20 to 25 years. And then they play a near 50-minute version of Soul Planet, which is not just a 50-minute jam. It's a very, very good 50-minute jam. I'm curious, are there any shows that you have willfully skipped for a variety of life reasons that you then looked back and were like, shit, I should have made that happen?
I actually don't know if there really have been any. I mean, like there are shows that I regret missing, but like I used to, and my life was such that I could, which is privilege, obviously. But like I used to just get to like every possible show that I could possibly get to. I mean, I saw 12 of the 17 shows in December 95. One of them that I missed was Binghamton, which is like one of the best hour-long stretches, 45-minute stretches in the history of Phish. But I was never getting to that show. Like, sure. I mean, I rearranged my, I really hope my son does not grow up to be as good at lying as I was. But I flew home at 8 a.m. the Monday of finals week. I moved all of my finals to the week before. At Northwestern University, I moved all of my finals so that I could make the UMass shows, like 12-4, 12-5. I saw 12-9 in Albany. I saw 12-11 in Portland. I saw 12-12 in Providence. And then I was going up to 16 and 17 to Lake Placid, like where my uncle lived and my dad was coming with, and like, so he could visit. And like, I was never going to Binghamton because I just couldn't. There was no, and then I did the whole New Year's run, So the summer 97, I saw the entire U.S. tour except the Great Went. But that's fine because I was never going to the Great Went because like I actually, the first day of the Great Went was the day I started TA training for graduate teaching assistant training at Arizona State, where I was studying with Sam Palafian, who I talked about in season, in episode 2 of Undermine this year, this season. It's like I shouldn't have gone to. I mean, I drove like home after Alpine. I shouldn't have gone to Deer Creek, and I shouldn't have gone to Darien, and I shouldn't have gone to Burgettstown, and then Darien. I came in on 2 wheels and I was like there for like 12 hours. And then I moved from Chicago to to Arizona, It's like, So I didn't miss The Great Went. Like I saw like four additional shows than I should have, So it's like, yeah, I don't really have, nowadays it's hard because like when I like, will choose to like hit a show, it's tough when like the show before the show is the show. But in general, and I've also just been so damn lucky with like what I have seen over the years, and I just like everything, like the second jam in Nashville, and just like it's just kind of, it's been an embarrassment of riches. So like that kind of helps me to. Early on, I was quite, when I heard that the Binghamton tapes, I had a few adult words that were said at a loud volume. And yet, like, but then you can keep playing that game. Like, I wouldn't, even though that's like one of the best 45-minute stretches in the history of the band, I wouldn't trade it in for the Albany Yem. Like,
Sure.
like hard no. So, it's like, I would be more pissed, not tons. I'd be some amount more pissed if I had seen Binghamton and not Albany. It's like, so yeah.
Well, it's a good point, and it's a good way to look at it, because I think about that with, like, I only saw Dick's this summer, and I've got some shows coming up here in the fall, but like I had a moment during the Carini where I was like, I was well rested. I enjoyed the Shoreline shows on my couch. I was able to go into the Dick's weekend, just feeling really, really good. It's an exhausting weekend at that, from a life standpoint, because I have two small kids at home that I have to come back to after every single show and hang out with in the morning and try to be a good dad before I go and see Fish again. But like during the Carini, I had a moment where I was like, this is the show that you're meant to be at. And I think that that's a really good way of looking at it. Like, you don't go to certain shows for a specific reason. Life gets in the way. If I had a direct path to go to every single Fish show, I would be there without question. But yeah, it was just interesting to me to like think about, you never know. And this could be a whole different conversation. I won't take us down this road, but there's often a debate of, well, the band can just turn it on when they want to turn it on, and they can turn it off when they want to turn it off. And so they choose to play a great show at Shoreline at the, behest of what's going to happen at Dick's. And they're not going to go with that much intensity. I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And I think that it leads to the challenge of like, what shows do I go to? And at what point, I think this gets back to kind of what we were talking about from a criticism standpoint. To me, even if I see a bad Fish show, if you say, in quotes, or a 1 or a 2 Fish show, if you will, part of my enjoyment is the communication around what happened at the show, why certain songs were played, why jams were abandoned, or why they continued in the way that they did. That to me will keep me going to Fish more than just every single show is Shoreline Night 1.
Yeah. I can also say from experience that there's been back in the day, in the 14 years that I toured with Boston Brass, like there were times when we would play 5-6 shows in a week, and it had nothing to do with professionalism or trying hard, because like if the only thing that I'm doing is buzzing my lips into a metal cup to like justify like paying my mortgage, then I'm taking like every damn note really seriously. Like my brother-in-law, like literally he's a firefighter. He literally ran into a burning house, even though he has a family, and ran out with a baby. I mean, it's like, it's just kind of that's more important than like, if we can only have one, and it's like, like dude, with if everything goes well, playing the tuba really well, or save my baby, it's like, everyone's going to go with save my, and I'm not trying to discount art in any way. But like I would
hope not,
like,
since it is your profession.
I would go. I mean, every time I play is 100%. Even when I'm in my practice room by myself with nobody but my poor neighbors listening, like I'm going all out. But there are times when no matter how nice the hotel is, no matter how, there were some international tours where like, they were like in Japan, they used to like, there would be a guy standing by my tuba case. I would get done off stage. I would put the tuba in, and he would like, he would bow and thank me, and then my tuba would just disappear, and then I would like get on like the bullet train the next day or a plane or something, and then my tuba would just be waiting backstage in the next city. Like and then you get home and like you're waiting to like connect in like, your international, to your domestic flight. I'm like, where's the dude? I'm like, oh crap, I got to carry this shit again, But even when we're getting that kind of red carpet treatment and they're like checking you into the hotel, it's like, there are nights when you're just not as high a energy as other nights, and you can be eating well, you can be exercising, you can just, there's just kind of like an ebb and flow to same thing with parenting. It's the same thing with like, with all of it. If you work out all the time, there are some times when you go in, you just don't have it,
Right.
Fish is still fish. Like they're still great. And there are times when they absolutely decide it's not a coincidence that on a proper New Year's run, 12/28 to 12/31, that 12/30 is continually like,
such a high.
Yeah. I mean, and there is intention there, but the whole, like, you can just kind of turn it on thing. The other thing is that if they did like, and I'd love to test this theory, but if they just did like, 4 15-minute jams in every first set, like, at some point that would like, we would want them to play more songs, possibly, it's like, it wouldn't be as special as it was this tour because there were so many years in 3.0 where it was just a collection of songs, which
Right.
Again, for my taste, were not nearly as well played as they were executed as they did back in the day. So it was like a lot of songs that were like played fine, but just not a lot of creativity. And all of a sudden they're stretching their legs in random places, and it's like exciting. Like when Hershey Night 2, when the Haleys jammed, I got very, very, very excited because it was just kind of like, wait, oh my, wait, this is holy shit, here we go. It was great. It was really great. And if they jammed every Haleys, it'd be like, I would still love it. You don't have to have the element of surprise. But I would say that there's just even like the biorhythm thing where there's just like nights when it's just hard to really, or when you don't want to go that fast, you just like, things are just a little bit more, chill. Or maybe a better way to put it would be that there were some nights on the road where I had to work twice as hard to sound the same level of good that I did the night before. And then other nights where it just kind of like fell out of the horn, and then some nights where it felt like a lot of work, which again, there's a good analogy there to like a workout, right? Where sometimes, or you go for a run, and sometimes a 5-mile run's like this. And other times it's like, when was the last time that running 5 miles was that hard? I don't run at all, so 5 miles would feel like a marathon to me. But to be clear, but you know what I mean? It's like you hear any runner talk about it.
I've run marathons in the past, and I've had experiences where every single one I go into with the same level of nervous intensity and nervous energy. And I've had marathons that start poorly and end really well. I've had marathons that start great and end horribly. And I've had marathons that throughout the entirety of it, I had one marathon that was like from the moment I started running to the moment I crossed the finish line, I felt like, I was playing 11, 17, 97 type of thing, where like, I felt like every single note that I hit worked, every single song that, every step that you took, I was at the right pace. I was breathing properly. And all of it, I wanted to run like that, even the good ones versus the bad ones.
Yep.
And so I think it's a great place to come to a conclusion, because I think that ultimately what you're speaking to is something that we're both speaking to is part of the reason why we continue to follow this band. There's a human element to the music. There's a human element to the evolution. There's a human element to the jamming that to me is far more interesting than them just hitting it every single night. And I think that what we saw this summer tour was a band that, for a variety of reasons, was able to tap into something higher and tap into something that allowed them to play at a higher level than they have in certain aspects of recent years. I don't know where this goes. We could see a really boring fall tour, because how do you improve upon the music that they played over the summer? Or we could hear a band that raises the level once again. Who knows? But that kind of unknown of what we'll be experiencing 2 to 3 weeks from now is just consistently fascinating to me.
Real quick plug, if I may, which is that this coming week I am interviewing Joe Alessi who's the principal trombone of the New York Philharmonic for my podcast, The Brass Junkies. He was on a number of years ago, but I am actually playing him. I got permission. I'm not just waiting to get sued. I'm actually going to play him in the podcast, the portion from Alive Again where Trey is talking about how amazing Joe is and about like the whole Yem solo that was written for him for Carnegie Hall to like get his reaction, which is going to be pretty cool. So
that'll be amazing. The Brass Junkies. Yep. We will direct all of our listeners here to check that out.
That'll be dropping in let's see, a week in about a week. Yeah, like 6 days from now. So
awesome. I look forward to that, man.
There we go.
Well, Drew, it is always a pleasure to go deep with you on this sort of topic. This is always
we solved a lot of the world's problems.
I think we did, at least in terms of who should criticize Fish and how.
I'm allowed to. I'm on the list. I don't know about you. Yeah.
They gave me a call and told me that I would be allowed in the second wave. But thank you so much, man, as always, for your time. It's always such a pleasure for me to talk with you, and wish you nothing but the best here for the rest of the day, the next couple of weeks. And I hope that we're able to talk here as we come into fall tour. I'd love to hear your thoughts as fall's happening.
Sounds good.
Awesome, man. Have a great day, Drew. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Thank you once again to Drew Hitz. And thanks to everyone here who hung out with us over the last nearly 2 hours. This was a ton of fun to just kind of riff and dive deep with Drew. I'm going to be back doing this here on Friday evening. If anyone wants to hang out, I'm going to have a good buddy of mine, Chris Glushko, Chop, as he's known on Twitter. Anyone who follows Chop knows that he does a really great job of ranking fish shows as they're happening. Some may say great, some may say infuriating, some may say horrible, some may say amazing. Wherever you fall into that, I think it's going to be a really fascinating conversation. We're basically going to take his overall ranking where it's at this point in time, a few weeks after summer 2021. We're going to go through kind of his rationale for certain shows being placed where they are, my rationale for where I think that they should be placed, so on and so forth. We're going to get into a really cool conversation focused solely on summer 2021. So I'm really excited for that, and I will look forward to seeing you all then. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.